Hello everyone, I'm Mr. Five. Today, I'm going to share an inspiring story about perseverance, justice, and how one person can challenge an entire system. This isn't just the story of an individual. It's about the invisible barriers many of us still face. This event took place on May 15, 2024 at Van Nuys Airport, one of the busiest private aviation hubs in the San Fernando Valley, Los Angeles, California. That morning, the Ball California sunlight streamed through the large glass windows of the private jet terminal. Gulfstream and Bombardier jets lined the runway, ready to whisk billionaires, artists, and business tycoons away to luxurious destinations around the world. The atmosphere exuded exclusivity, an elite world where passengers moved in silence, free from long lines or crowded spaces. Imani Johnson stepped into the main lobby, her heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor. She didn't need a fur coat or a designer handbag to prove her status. Her confidence and presence alone turned heads. A perfectly tailored cream suit accentuated her smooth brown skin. Her natural curls framed a striking face, her sharp eyes glowing with determination. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone. She didn't have to. But the world still wasn't ready to accept that. Approaching the check-in counter, Imani met Emily Carter, a receptionist with a polished appearance and bright eyes that briefly flickered with surprise. But unlike many others, Emily quickly regained her composure, flashing a professional, welcoming smile. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I assist you today?" "Good morning, Emily. I'm here to check in for my flight to New York. Johnson 1. Imani's voice was warm and steady, yet commanding. Emily tapped lightly on her computer screen, scanning the flight details. "Yes, Miss Johnson, everything is set. Your pilot will meet you shortly to prepare for departure." Imani nodded. She was no stranger to this process. As the CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the U.S., flights like this were just part of her routine. But some things never changed. The skepticism, the lingering glances, the unspoken questions. And just as expected, it came the moment. Adam Stewart, today's pilot, stepped into the room. He stepped into the lobby, his uniform crisp and neatly pressed, broad shoulders, a confident stride, and sharp eyes that carried a hint of arrogance. He didn't greet Imani right away. Instead, his gaze swept over her, assessing her as if she were a job applicant rather than a client. "You're Miss Johnson?" Adam asked, his tone laced with skepticism. Imani offered a polite smile. "Yes, that's me." Adam's brow furrowed slightly before he glanced at Emily, as if seeking confirmation. "You're the owner of Johnson 1? Emily stood frozen, her eyes flickering with uncertainty, unsure of how to respond. But Imani was different. She had seen this before. The question wasn't just about the jet. It was about her, about ownership, about her place in this world. Her smile remained steady. "That's right, and I trust everything is ready to go." Adam nodded, but the doubt in his eyes lingered. "Of course, it's just that we don't usually have clients like you. Clients like her?" Imani blinked, still smiling, but her gaze sharpened. "Could you clarify that, Captain Stewart?" Adam hesitated for a split second, realizing he had misspoken, yet he tried to maintain his composure. No, I just meant that typically private jet owners are a little different." Different, a seemingly harmless word, but everyone knew exactly what it meant. Not a white man, not a billionaire heir, not the kind of person Adam was used to flying for. Imani's fingers tightened slightly around the strap of her handbag. "You're right. I'm not like the people you worked for before. I built my company from the ground up. I don't need to look like anyone else to be here. I belong here. And that jet, it's mine." A heavy silence hung in the air. Emily swallowed nervously while Adam squared his shoulders, his usual confidence momentarily shaken. He let out a dry chuckle, as if trying to brush the moment aside. "Of course, Miss Johnson. Just caught me off guard, that's all. I'll run the pre-flight check now." Adam turned on his heel and walked off, but Imani couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. She took a deep breath, then turned to Emily. "Is he always like that?" Emily bit her lip, clearly reluctant to say anything that could get her into trouble, but after a pause, she gave a small nod. "I'm sorry, Miss Johnson. He can be a little rigid." Imani nodded. She wasn't expecting an apology from Emily. Emily wasn't the problem. The problem was a system that had grown too comfortable deciding who was allowed in spaces like this. She pulled out her phone and typed a quick message to Blake Phillips, her trusted partner. "Everything's fine for now, but I have a feeling this won't be simple. If anything comes up, you'll be the first to know." The reply came almost instantly. "Always ready. Just say the word if you need me to step in." Imani put her phone away, her gaze drifting toward the runway where her Gulfstream jet gleamed under the morning sun. She had fought too many battles to turn back now. From being a young black woman studying tech in a classroom full of men, to building a company while investors doubted her every move, she knew one thing for sure. She had come too far to let anyone question her place. She took a deep breath and stood tall. She didn't need anyone's permission to board her own jet. But what she didn't know was that Adam Stewart wasn't ready to back down either. And the real battle was just beginning. Imani stepped into the VIP lounge, where plush leather chairs were neatly arranged and the warm glow of golden lights reflected off the glass tabletops. A space of luxury designed for people like her, those with power, status, and the freedom to move as they pleased. But not everyone seemed to believe she belonged here. She slipped off her Scotch cream blazer, draping it over the back of a chair, then poured herself a glass of water from the crystal decanter on the table. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, her Gulfstream G650 sat waiting on the tarmac, ready for takeoff. But instead of the usual sense of ease that accompanied her flights, Imani could feel the quiet tension in the air. Adam Stewart, her pilot, had made her stop, explain, and justify her own ownership. She was used to this, but that didn't mean she would let it slide without a response. Her phone vibrated softly on the table. Blake Phillips, her trusted business partner. "Everything okay? I've got a bad feeling about this." "It's fine for now, but there's a problem. The pilot doesn't seem to accept that I own the plane. I'll handle it. Say the word if you need me to step in. I don't want you being disrespected." "I'll call if it gets worse." She set her phone down, just as Emily Carter. The check-in attendant stepped into the lounge. The young woman looked tense, her hands clasped tightly in front of her dress. "Miss Johnson." Emily hesitated. Imani looked up, offering her a gentle smile. What is it, Emily?" Emily took a deep breath, as if debating whether to speak. Finally, she made her decision. "Captain Stewart. I don't think he believes you're really the owner. I overheard him telling a colleague that he wants to double-check to make sure your paperwork is legitimate." Imani set her glass down, feeling a slow wave of irritation rise within her, not because she was surprised. She had seen this too many times before, but because she was exhausted by it. "He thinks I forged my own documents?" Emily pressed her lips together. "I think he just can't accept that a woman like you owns a plane like that." Imani exhaled, pushing herself to her feet. She wasn't going to let this continue. "Thank you, Emily." Her voice was steady, her eyes unwavering. "I'll take care of it myself." Emily looked at her with a mix of admiration and concern, but, in the end, gave a small nod. As Imani stepped toward the aircraft boarding gate, she saw Adam Stewart standing with a maintenance technician, his expression serious. "Captain Stewart." Her voice was calm, but carried undeniable authority. Adam turned, momentarily surprised to see her. "Miss Johnson." He responded, maintaining a professional demeanor, though there was still a certain distance in his tone. "I heard you still have concerns about my ownership of this aircraft." She got straight to the point, no hesitation. Adam stiffened slightly, then shrugged. "Just a routine check, nothing personal." Imani studied him, her gaze sharp and unwavering. "Really? Do you verify every client like this, or just clients like me?" A brief silence. She continued. "I've provided all the necessary paperwork. You've seen the ownership contract. I have a clear flight history with this company, so tell me, what's the real issue here?" His jaw tightened, but instead of answering directly, he said, "We just want to make sure everything is safe and legitimate." Imani let out a dry chuckle. "You don't have to pretend, Captain Stewart. I know exactly what this is about. But let me make one thing clear. I've worked my entire life to be here, and I will not let anyone, including you, question my place. If you feel you can't operate this flight professionally, I'll have no problem requesting another pilot." A long silence stretched between them. After a moment, Adam clenched his jaw, but knew he had lost. "That won't be necessary, Miss Johnson. I'll proceed with the pre-flight preparations." "Good," Imani said before stepping onto the aircraft stairs, never looking back. As she stepped into the cabin, she saw Ryan Foster's Tejas, the flight attendant, standing at the door with a professional smile. But in his eyes there was something more, a clear and genuine respect. "Welcome aboard, Miss Johnson. It's an honor to have you with us." She gave him a small smile. "Thank you, Ryan." Ryan nodded, then moved inside to continue preparing the cabin. But before he left, he said softly, "I saw what happened. You handled it well." Imani nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Not everyone was like Adam. There were still people who understood, people who saw her worth. She took her seat, pulling out her phone. A message from Blake Phillips lit up the screen. "Everything okay?" "It's fine. We're taking off now." Blake's reply came almost instantly. "Good. Just remember, you don't have to fight these battles alone, Imani." She stared at the message for a moment, then smiled softly. He was right. She wasn't alone. At that moment, she realized she hadn't just won a confrontation, she had pushed the world one step closer to seeing people like her in spaces they had always deserved to be in. And the fight wasn't over. but she would always be ready. The cabin of the Gulf Stream, G650, was bathed in soft ambient lighting, reflecting off the mahogany wood tables and premium leather seats. Everything exuded elegance, a fitting space for a woman who had built an empire of her own. Imani sat upright in her seat, but her mind lingered on the events that had just unfolded. She had confronted Adam Stewart, forcing him to back down for now, but her instincts told her something still wasn't right. Her fingers glided over the tablet screen, where the presentation for her high-stakes meeting in New York was already pulled up. She tried to focus, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the encounter with Adam. She couldn't just let this slide as a minor inconvenience, not just for herself, but for the hundreds, the thousands of other black women still fighting for their place in a world full of barriers. Her elegant wristwatch struck 9 a.m. She made a decision. Silence was not an option. Imani opened her laptop and drafted a formal email to the management of the private aviation company. Subject: Report on unprofessional conduct by pilot Adam Stewart. Message: To the management team at Elite Aviation. This morning at Van Nuys Airport, I encountered a situation that I cannot overlook. Captain Adam Stewart, the pilot assigned to my flight to New York, repeatedly questioned the legitimacy of my aircraft ownership despite my having provided all necessary documentation. His words and demeanor clearly reflected bias, disrupting my schedule and forcing me to waste time reaffirming an indisputable fact: that I am the rightful owner of this Gulfstream G650. I fully understand that safety is the highest priority, but his actions were not rooted in any legitimate concern. Rather, they stemmed from personal prejudice. This was not just an unpleasant experience. It highlights a deeper issue within the service your company provides. I am requesting a formal investigation into this matter, as well as appropriate measures to ensure that future clients do not experience similar discrimination. I will be monitoring this situation closely and expect a timely response. Best regards, Imani Johnson. She hit send. Feeling a weight lift off her shoulders, this wasn't just about standing up for herself. It was about ensuring that Adam wouldn't be allowed to treat anyone else this way again. The moment she hit send, her phone vibrated. Blake Phillips. I just heard about what happened with Adam Stewart. Do you want me to step in directly? Imani. I just sent a formal complaint to the company, but if you can do anything to push this forward, I'd really appreciate it. Blake. I have some connections with upper management. Let me make a few calls. They won't be able to ignore this. Imani smiled. She didn't always have to fight alone. With allies like Blake, people who understood that this battle wasn't just hers, but part of a much larger fight, she knew change was possible. Just 30 minutes later, a response from the aviation company appeared in Imani's inbox. Subject: Review request regarding Captain Adam Stewart's conduct. Dear Miss Johnson, thank you for bringing this matter to our attention. We sincerely regret the unprofessional experience you encountered with Captain Stewart. We have received a call from Senior Advisor Blake Phillips regarding this issue, and we will be launching an immediate investigation. We are committed to maintaining a professional, discrimination-free environment across all our services. We will keep you informed of the next steps in this process. Best regards, Michael Connors, CEO, Elite Aviation. Imani read the email, then leaned back in her seat, feeling a sense of relief, but also more determined than ever. She knew Adam would be held accountable, and beyond that, the system itself would have to change. The announcement from the cockpit echoed through the cabin. Adam Stewart was finally ready for takeoff. But something in his voice had changed. The confidence he once carried now sounded strained, almost forced. Imani knew why. He had received word from his superiors. As the jet lifted off the ground, she felt the smooth power of the engines as they soared into the sky. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting this feeling remind her of everything she had achieved. No one could take away what she had built. No one could question her place in this world. And most importantly, no one could stop her from rising even higher. After landing in New York, Imani stepped down the stairs of her own aircraft, her head held high, her eyes filled with unwavering confidence. She knew this fight wasn't just about Adam Stewart. It was about a system that had long refused to accept change, but if there was one thing she was certain of, it was this. She would never be silent. She had stood her ground today at Iwa, and she would do it again tomorrow. The sky has no limits, and neither does she. If you've ever felt underestimated, doubted, or excluded from a space where you rightfully belong, remember, you have the right to speak up. Justice doesn't happen overnight, but it always belongs to those who dare to fight for it. And above all, never let anyone define your worth. If this story inspired you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because change begins with the voices like yours, mine, and ours. Imani landed in New York, stepping down the stairs of her own jet with a sense of ease, but also deep reflection. Her important meeting was just a few hours away, yet her mind kept circling back to the events of that morning with Adam Stewart. She had done the right thing, not just for herself, but for the hundreds, the thousands of other black women who were still being doubted, still being excluded from spaces where they rightfully belonged. Her phone buzzed just as she slid into the waiting limousine. Blake Phillips. I have an update. Management has officially launched an investigation into Adam. I figured you'd want to hear this. Imani. I guess they couldn't ignore it. Blake. It's more than just a routine investigation. I heard CEO Michael Connors personally called Adam while your flight was still in the air. Imani raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. Imani. So, they're taking this seriously. Blake. You don't get it. This wasn't just a casual conversation. Adam was summoned the moment the plane landed. He might lose his job. Imani leaned back into her seat, her gaze drifting to the vibrant cityscape of New York, stretching beyond the tinted windows. A part of her wanted to feel satisfied, but another part of her felt something else. Not for Adam, but for the fact that situations like this still existed. Why was it that someone like her, who had built everything from nothing, still had to prove her worth over and over again? In Los Angeles, just as Imani's flight landed, Adam received a call he had not been looking forward to. Michael Connors, CEO of Elite Aviation. Captain Stewart, we have received a serious report regarding your conduct this morning. Standing in a small conference room. At the airport, Adam held the phone to his ear, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. I can explain, sir. Good. Then explain to me why a customer who provided all the required documentation was still questioned about her ownership, simply because she didn't look like the other clients. Connor's voice was sharp, leaving no room for excuses. Adam took a deep breath, but even he knew there was no justifiable explanation for this. I was just trying to follow protocol. I had no intention of discrimination. "You're lying to yourself, Captain Stewart," Connor said slowly, his tone firm. "And you know it?" Adam said nothing, his fists clenching at his sides. "We are currently reviewing disciplinary action. Effective immediately, you are suspended from duty." The call ended, leaving behind a heavy silence in the room. Adam stood there, feeling the authority he once held slipping from his grasp. He had thought he was in control, that he could decide who was worthy of flying and who wasn't. But he had been wrong. At the airport, Ryan Foster, the flight attendant on Imani's flight, had witnessed everything. And he knew Imani was right, not just because she was a client, but because no one should be treated that way. No one should not have to prove their worth over and over again just because they looked different. Ryan stood near the check-in counter where Emily Carter was also watching the situation unfold. "Have you heard anything yet?" Emily asked, her voice quiet but full of concern. Ryan nodded. "Adam has been suspended." Emily exhaled softly, not out of satisfaction, but because justice had finally done its job. "This isn't just about Adam," Ryan said slowly. "It's about the whole system." Emily nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I think this might actually change the way the company operates." Ryan gave a small smile. "Not just the company, the way the world sees people like Imani in New York." Imani walked into her meeting with an unshakable confidence. The meeting went smoothly. The deal was signed, and her company officially expanded into a new market. But as she stepped out of the boardroom, she knew there was still another fight she hadn't fully won yet. She pulled out her phone and drafted an email to CEO Connors. Subject: taking justice one step further. Dear Mr. Connors, I appreciate the way your company has handled the issue with Captain Stewart. However, I believe disciplining one individual isn't enough. The system needs to change. I am proposing a company-wide training program on diversity and inclusion for pilots, ground staff, and all employees. This will not only help prevent similar incidents in the future, but also foster a more professional and respectful environment. I am more than willing to collaborate with you to implement this program. Best regards, Imani Johnson. She hit send, then leaned back in her chair. She had secured justice for herself. But true justice meant ensuring no one else would have to go through the same fight. A few weeks later, an internal announcement was sent out to all employees at Elite Aviation. Subject: important policy changes at Elite Aviation. Dear team, following a recent unfortunate incident, we recognize the need for decisive action to ensure that all of our customers are treated with fairness and respect. Starting next month, we will be implementing a company-wide training program on diversity and inclusion. We believe that a truly professional environment is one where every client, regardless of race or background, is treated with the same level of dignity and respect. We appreciate your cooperation in making this vision a reality. Best regards, Michael Connors, CEO, elite aviation. Imani read the email while seated in her own jet, preparing for her next flight. A small smile formed on her lips. Justice isn't just about one person, it's about changing the system. And today, she had changed a piece of the world. The sky had never looked more open. She wasn't just flying, she was leading the way. As Imani Johnson's Gulfstream G650 lifted off from Teterboro Airport in New York, bound for Los Angeles, the sky blazed with the hues of a golden sunset. She leaned back in her seat, gazing out of the window where the vast sky stretched endlessly before her. The major deal had been signed. Her company had now secured its place in the international market, opening a new chapter for black women in tech. But that wasn't what occupied her thoughts in this moment. She thought about Adam Stewart. She thought about how long this system had functioned. A system where people like her had to prove themselves over and over just to be accepted, just to claim what others took for granted. Message from Blake Phillips. Management has officially removed Adam Stewart from the flight team. He will no longer be piloting for elite aviation. I suppose that was inevitable, Imani replied. Yes, but that's not the best part. The diversity and inclusion training program you proposed has been fully approved. The CEO just announced it, company-wide. True justice isn't about removing one individual. It's about changing the entire system. She texted back. Blake responded instantly. And you did exactly that, Imani. She set her phone down, a quiet smile lingering on her lips. This wasn't just her victory. It was a victory for all the women like her. The ones who had never been given a seat at the table, the ones who had been overlooked, underestimated, and pushed aside simply because they didn't look like the people who had always occupied those spaces. Today, a door had been opened, and she would make sure it never closed again. In the cabin, Ryan Foster, the flight attendant, approached with a glass of iced lemonade and gently set it down on the table in front of her. Miss Johnson, is there anything else I can get you? His tone remained professionally polite, but there was a warmth in it now, something more than just routine service. Imani looked up at him. She remembered the way he had quietly observed everything at Van Nuys Airport, how he hadn't said a word, yet his eyes had spoken volumes. She smiled. No, thank you, Ryan. I'm fine. Ryan hesitated for a moment before speaking. I just wanted to say, I really admire the way you handled everything. I've been a flight attendant for nearly a decade, and I've seen a lot of unfair things happen. But it's rare to see someone actually stand up and fight back like you did. Imani held his gaze for a moment before replying softly, I couldn't stay silent. If I don't stand up, who will? Ryan nodded, then gave a slight bow before stepping away. But she could tell, something had shifted in him. He was no longer just an observer from a distance. He had learned that justice doesn't happen on its own. It comes from those who demand it. As the flight touched down in Los Angeles, Imani stepped down the aircraft stairs, feeling both a sense of relief and renewed determination. Outside the Hutch private landing zone at Van Nuys Airport, she spotted Emily Carter, the check-in agent she had met just days ago. Emily hurried toward her, as if she had been waiting. Miss Johnson, she called. Imani paused, smiling. Emily, it's good to see you. Emily pressed her lips together, as if gathering courage, then said, I just wanted to say Thank you. Imani raised an eyebrow. Thank me? Emily nodded firmly. I've been working here for 3 years. I've seen plenty of people like Adam Stewart, people who think they have the right to decide who belongs here and who doesn't. But I've never had the courage to speak up. She hesitated for a moment before continuing. But watching you stand up for yourself, seeing that you didn't let it go unnoticed, it made me realize that we can change things if we're brave enough to speak the truth. Imani placed a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder, giving it a light squeeze. You're right, and sometimes all it takes is one person standing up to make an entire system shift. Emily smiled, but there was something more in her eyes than just gratitude. It was belief that justice can come if we refuse to stay silent. A week later, Elite Aviation officially launched its diversity and inclusion training program. An internal email was sent out to all employees. Subject: a new step forward for Elite Aviation. Dear team, we are committed to fostering an environment where every customer, regardless of race, gender, or background, is treated with equal respect. That is why, starting next month, all employees will participate in a company-wide diversity and inclusion training program. We believe that only by recognizing the value of every individual can we truly be a world-class aviation company. Best regards, Michael Connors, CEO, Elite Aviation. Imani read the email as she sat in her office, overlooking the Los Angeles skyline from the top floor of her building. She took a sip of coffee, a quiet, satisfied smile forming on her lips. She hadn't just won for herself. She had changed an entire system. And that meant that those who came after her would no longer have to fight alone. Inside the headquarters of Elite Aviation, thick documents lay neatly stacked on the conference table, reflecting the bright overhead lights. On the large screen at the front of the room, CEO Michael Connors stood before a group of senior executives. Behind him, bold letters displayed Diversity and Equity, Elite Aviation's next step. Imani sat in the front row, her hands loosely clasped, her gaze calm yet sharp. She was no longer the woman whose ownership of her own jet had been questioned. Today, she was the catalyst for real change. Michael Connors cleared his throat, then spoke. The incident at Van Nuys Airport was not an isolated case. This is a systemic issue, and we cannot allow it to continue. His eyes scanned the room. Everyone here knew what had happened to Imani. We've decided that this cannot stop at individual disciplinary action. What we need is real, lasting change. The screen behind him shifted, displaying an official announcement. Subject: implementation of mandatory diversity and equity training. Starting next quarter, all Elite Aviation employees, including pilots, flight attendants, and ground staff, will be required to complete a comprehensive diversity and inclusion training program. Our goal is not just to prevent similar mistakes in the future, but to change the way we think from the ground up. A round of applause erupted from the back of the room. A voice spoke up. This is long overdue. Imani smiled slightly, but she wasn't finished yet. She stood. Every eye in the room turned toward her. Thank you for listening, but I want to emphasize something, she said, stepping forward, her voice steady and commanding. Today we sit here talking about change, but I want each of you to remember, this isn't just a corporate decision. This is about people. She looked around the room before continuing. I am not the first person to experience this, and I don't want anyone else to go through it again. When a woman steps onto her own private jet, she shouldn't have to prove she belongs there. When a black man books a first-class ticket, he shouldn't have to verify his identity more times than other passengers. Justice isn't just about policies on paper. It's about how we treat each other every single day. The room fell into silence, faces deep in thought. The truth was sinking in. A silver-haired woman, the head of human resources, finally spoke up. I've worked in this industry for 30 years, but today I realize there are things I've never questioned before. Thank you, Miss Johnson. Imani nodded, her expression unwavering. I appreciate your willingness to change, but don't let it stop at words. Let your actions prove it, and they did.